Is my depression a sign of low iman or that I'm ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I pray all of my salah. I make dua constantly, but why do I still feel so disconnected? There are some crucial discussions that unfortunately the Muslim community feels too ashamed to have, and mental health is one of them. The World Health Organization estimates that around 5% of adults worldwide suffer from depression. That's 1 in 20 people you know, and Muslims aren't exempt from that statistic. So what can we do to tackle this giant, both clinically and through our deen? That's what we're discussing today. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the AlMaghrib podcast, where we chat with scholars, community leaders, and specialists in fields serving the Muslim community. Today, I had the privilege of sitting down with Ustad Sultan, AlMaghrib's resident expert on Islamic psychology. We spoke about everything from seasonal depression to loneliness, mental health stigma, and how our faith can be a source of healing when we're struggling emotionally. We hope you find it beneficial, and if you want more in-depth discussions like these, be sure to hit subscribe and turn on your notification bell. We are very happy to welcome back Ustad Sultan, licensed mental health counselor. Alhamdulillah, has taught a number of courses within Maghrib on mental health. Welcome back, Ustad. How are you doing?
Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
Alhamdulillah. So we're recording this right now. It's August. People are already starting to, as the season starts to turn into fall, many of our listeners, especially our Muslim sisters, are starting to feel overwhelmed and even, a sadness with regards to the changing of the summer months into the fall and darkness. Could you explain to us what seasonal depression is? I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, what is that? And when did people start to feel this?
Yeah, seasonal depression, or seasonal affective disorder, as it's called in more like clinical language, is where at the same time every year, certain people will experience a real dip in their mood. They might notice change in appetite, change in sleeping patterns. So typically with seasonal affective disorder, it's an increase in appetite and an increase in wanting to sleep, and just a really down mood more days than not. It might really affect their thought process. They're just feeling a sense of sadness, unexplained sadness a lot of the time. And then their thought process will go into negative territory. It'll also impact, it can also impact their relationships with people, because they just are feeling really low energy, and their ability to function in their everyday life might be affected as well. You mentioned for our Muslim sisters, I think also what people don't often talk about is, like, with the fall comes the start of, the releasing the slow pace of the summer and the more kind of relaxing pace of the summer. And suddenly now, okay, the kids are in school and you're packing lunches and you're getting everything ready for school the next day. You have after school activities and you're starting to be on this like go, go, go mode. And that can have a really big impact on mental health.
When did this start to be a thing? Has this always been a thing and it was just people never talked about it? Or is, I could imagine there are places, if you're talking about Canada, places in Europe where, the summer or the winter, just the night extends so much during the winter. Are they just really, really sad, these people, or?
Well, in a lot of cultures, actually, they create kind of cultural norms that allow people to enjoy some of what winter brings. So, yes, you're not going to have as much sunlight, and that's usually where chemically the seasonal depression stems from, is a lack of sunlight. So a lot of doctors will recommend vitamin D supplement. There's like a type of light therapy that stimulates, it's it's similar to the way the sun works. So that can be helpful. But some cultures where they have long nights, like in Danish, there's like a term, it's called Haig or something. I can't remember how it's pronounced, but it's basically this concept of embracing the good that winter can bring, of community, of warm blankets, a cup of tea by the fire, and things like that, so that people have something to look forward to during those months. And so that's a helpful mental reframe that a lot of cultures have embraced, not necessarily something we've done as successfully in America, but it
Because we're
can be
still go,
helpful.
go, go.
Yep.
In
Yeah.
fact, we turn up the pace in the fall and the winter as opposed to the summer.
Yeah, which results in more isolation, and, versus in those cultures where people view that as a time to come together in a warm space.
I wonder who decided that summer is when kids should have time off. Maybe we should have winters off and have school in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, being in Houston, I always said that actually just because the idea of in the summer, my kids can't do anything outdoors because it's too hot here. And so you in Houston, I wouldn't be surprised if actually some people might have a little bit of seasonal affective disorder in the summers because they're stuck indoors so constantly. So it's not just the season can be different depending on where you are living. But yeah, I think that there should be a lot more flexibility in terms of when we get to slow down the pace a little bit.
A friend of mine recently, he was telling me that he suffers from seasonal depression. He lives in a city where the winters are just really long. He didn't grow up in that city. It's really, really hard for him. And everybody around him's like, man, this guy's just being super soft. How do people recognize this in their family members, recognize it in their, if someone's not able to articulate or even diagnose themselves, like how do I notice these signs?
So the thing with any type of symptom is you want to understand the pattern, right? Like you want to understand what's happening at the root of it, where is it coming from? So if you know somebody with seasonal affective disorder, you know that it hits at the same time every single year. And so what that does is it's going to help you empathize a little bit more because you realize this is not a choice issue for this person, right? This is not them saying, you know what? I'm just giving up on the tasks that I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to stay in bed all day. You see the way that they're functioning throughout the year. You know that this is not characteristic of them. And so you start to pick up on the patterns. And so if at a certain time, that's the main symptom of seasonal depression is that it hits at around the same time every year and the same symptoms show up of them, change in appetite, change in sleep pattern, change in mood, and just lower energy. So those are the things that you want to look out for. And if things get serious to a serious point, it can even result in depressive thoughts to the extent of suicidal thoughts that you want to be particularly aware of and cautious about.
I was just going to ask you, like, how serious does this actually get? So
Yeah.
it gets as
Yeah.
serious as it gets, basically.
Yeah, it can get to that point. It can get to that point, unfortunately. And that's when you know that you actually need a professional help because that's not something that a person can just overcome through willpower. And I think that's where some people, like you said, would be like, oh, you're just too soft. It's that there's this misconception that through sheer willpower, you should be able to power yourself through these symptoms and you should be able to get yourself to feel better. But depression is not the same as just a simple like low mood day. There is such a chemical component brain wise that it isn't something that can just be changed through willpower. And when it gets serious, professional help would be recommended.
Is it changed by changing the city that you're in, going and taking a trip if a person can?
Yeah, if they can,
Yeah.
if a person has that privilege, right, then being in a place where you get more sunlight per day in the winter time, that would be ideal for somebody who struggles with seasonal affective disorder. But for some people, that's not feasible, and that's where you would do phototherapy. It's called that light therapy that I mentioned, and talk to a
What
professional
is
about
that?
that. So there's a special type of light that simulates sunlight. And it allows you to gain some of the same benefits that you would get from being out in sunlight. And whatever amount of sunlight you can get, waking up early so that your circadian rhythm regulates to that sun exposure, and getting out as much as you can in the sunlight, doing your work if you're working from home, doing your work in the sun during sunlight hours, that would be ideal.
It does remind me when you talked about how cultures embrace the night, like how we have this concept where you have the acts of worship of the winter. And so the winter nights are long and so the days are short. So you create a culture of fasting for those days. You create a culture of qiyam al-layl for yourself and your family maybe, and just really trying to embrace the night in different ways. But even when you're talking about this idea of diagnosis, self-diagnosis, friends around you, I think one of the things also that might affect it even more so is loneliness, right? So the winter for some people just becomes a very lonely period as well because it is cold. So I don't want to go out and meet with people, and my friends don't want to go and meet as much as we do, for example, in the summertime. What effect does loneliness have on seasonal depression, and what can we do to combat that also?
Loneliness or social isolation actually is most often one of the symptoms of any type of depression, including seasonal depression. So if you notice somebody that you love or yourself withdrawing from the situations that they enjoy, they're not enjoying activities in the same way, they're not hanging out with people in the same way, that's a sign to be aware of, and that's a symptom of depression or seasonal depression. And it's a cycle. It's a cycle that is perpetuated. So like you said, it's okay if it's cold, you don't hang out, which results in you feeling down even further. And because you feel down, you isolate more. And because you isolate more, you start to think to yourself, you know what, nobody even notices that I'm not here. Nobody cares. And so it's not like anybody's reaching out to me. And so it perpetuates this negative thought process that brings you further and further into the spiral of depression. So what I would recommend in a situation like that, there's something called behavioral activation. It's one of the interventions for depression, any type of depression. And what that entails is there are certain things that we know make you feel better, or at least it's definitely not going to make you feel worse, but it can make you feel a little bit better. So taking a walk in nature, for example, research proven, and if you then tie it with reflection on the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're getting a spiritual rejuvenation too, right? Or, spending
So
time.
if it's like super cold outside and I take a walk, it's not going to make me feel better. I'm going to feel miserable, and I'm probably going to get sadder coming back inside.
Well, I don't know, because everybody's a little bit different,
Okay,
right?
okay,
Like, so
sure.
again, being in Houston, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's like that's a whole different reflection point. But remembering time in New York, yes, there's certain weather where
you go
it's
outside.
not, yes, you're not necessarily going to enjoy it, but even without that enjoyment, even a few minutes is still going to provide you with some of the benefits of being outdoors. There's something about fresh air. There's something about seeing the sky. There was a research study done where it was like if you walk and you look at the leaves, although in the winter there aren't leaves, but even looking at the trees, right? The benefit that comes from that, right? As a society, we have grown so distant from nature, and that has been incredibly detrimental, right? So anything that you can do to be out is going to be helpful.
Okay.
The other behavioral activation in this would be for the loneliness component is that don't wait for your friends to reach out. You reach out to them. Try and organize like an indoor kind of get together, no like, low pressure kind of get together with no obstacles, as you don't have to clean up your house. You don't have to cook a meal. You don't have to do that. Just have people come together and solidify those
So go
bonds.
meet at a neutral place somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Or if you don't feel like leaving your house, okay, tell them to come over, but just without putting that pressure on yourself and giving them the heads up that, hey, this is going to be like a pajama hangout. Let's do this at my place. And that way you are using that behavioral activation. You're activating a behavior that will probably be helpful.
What is a pajama hangout?
So like a pajama hangout would be that basically it's not a technical term. I just made it up, but
Okay, it sounded like you just made it up.
yeah.
We're trying to figure out what that is.
So it would just be like people come over in whatever their most comfortable clothes are, and that people don't go out of their way to like there's nothing that prevents this from just being a laid back hangout, because a lot of times for women it's okay, I have to look a certain way, present myself a certain way, I have to bring a certain thing, I have to have my house look a certain way, all of these different barriers that prevent people from connecting. And so, one of the things I often say is that imperfection yields connection, right? So show up imperfectly and it helps you to connect with others.
So the idea of imperfection, what is it?
Connection.
Yields connection. So I know one that we have, which is called al-jud bil-mawjud. Al-jud bil-mawjud, that you be generous with whatever's present. And so it's the idea of the highest level of hospitality is when I don't have to have any takalluf. I don't have to go through any sort of, I don't have to jump through any hoops to host you. Like, that's that phrase, ahlan wa sahlan, that you are family and you're easy. Family, I don't have to do anything for. That's my brother, that's my sister, come over, sure. If the house is a mess, you're going to see the house is a mess. But you're an easy guest to me. And so I think that's a great point, that the more we're able to make it so that people are, and that's why Islam also talks so much about the etiquette of being a guest, as so that you don't like put the person, being a host is a vulnerable space. And that's why people don't host. But if I come with the etiquettes of Islam where I don't look anywhere I'm not supposed to look, I sit exactly where the host tells me to sit, and I just be that really type of a light guest, then we might see more of that connection, that hospitality that's going to cause connection.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that as a culture here, we really lost a lot of that where, we live in an Instagram culture now where if it's not worthy of the gram, it's not worthy of happening, right? So unless you can take a picture that makes something look perfect, then is it worthwhile? And I think that we really need to move away from that because I think that really results in so much disconnection between people and artificial connection too, right? So, I love that idea of making things easy. And the people that you feel, if you think about it, right? Like I think about people's houses that I've gone to and I have been like, you know what? I can't invite this person to my house until I'm able to make it like look really good because this is how they presented themselves, and it has to be like a full azuma, I mean like a full on spread of dinner and things like that because that's the standard that they've set for me. Versus when I've gone to a friend's house where it's just like, oh, like I have these leftovers in the fridge. Let's cobble together a meal and we'll just sit and chat. Those are the friends who can come over anytime and there's no weight on my shoulders because I know they're going to be happy with whatever because we're there to connect. We're not there to just, present something that looks perfect.
Do you see men being more lonely than women?
Yes, definitely.
And what can be done? I can tell you, one time we were having Friday Night Lights at the Masjid Clear Lake Islamic Center, and we were doing one session on friendship. And Sheikh Walid was adamant to me. He said that I want you to ask the audience how many men over 40 have friends. And he said, I guarantee you that some of them will have no friends, zero friends. And in fact, and he said like the ones in the 50s, 60s, I guarantee you there are going to be some who have zero friends. They come to the masjid and everything, they have zero friends. And I'm like, Sheikh, I can't imagine that. I can't fathom that because I think of like my parents' generation, they had so many friends, like so many, and the hospitality and the hosting and all of that. But is it that men kind of just start focusing on family once they hit their 30s? Like they're not hanging out anymore. They're not making time. There's, like you mentioned, all of that race that pace with regards to their kids and projects, and then whatever time they're spending it at home. What is it about men that's causing us to have such loneliness?
I think it's a sad statistic, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I remember listening to a podcast about this exact topic. I do think the struggle with work-life balance plays a really big role where often men determine their value based on what they can bring in physically into their families. So, how far can I progress in my career? How much money can I make? What value can I bring through that lens? And you lose a lot of the important things in life when that's the only value, one of the very few values that you're focused on. And it's beautiful to prioritize your family and time with your family, but it's not enough. Both spouses need their own separate friendships and friendship circles for support that only a friend can give in the way that a spouse may not necessarily be able to give. I think for men, one of the struggles is not just time, but I do think that there's no vulnerability in the ways that maybe were a little bit easier to have in earlier generations, right? Like the idea of going deep and having deep conversations about your own, like sharing a struggle that you're going through, a struggle that there are very few men who think, you know what, I can call up this friend of mine and I can tell him about this and he's going to be a good ear for this. He's going to give me some good insight. Very few men have that, but a lot of women do. And it is something so valuable. And the impact that it has on your psychological health is very obvious, but even the impact it has on your physical health, the way it reduces stress, the way it helps to prevent cardiac illness and things like that, like those kinds of friendships are so, so valuable. But we live in a time and a culture where that type of vulnerability is viewed as being weak. So what man is going to do that with his friends, even though men obviously struggle in a lot of the same ways that women do, they just don't have that outlet. And it's really unfortunate. Like we see the example of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he lost Ibrahim, his son, and he cried in front of his companions. And like it shows that manliness does not lie in not having emotions. But there's a give and take, and a lot of times it's very difficult for people to take that step and that willingness. The other thing is women often bond through talking and having conversations. Men often bond through doing things together. So they need to have like activities. It's a lot less pressure. And so consistent activities where like once a month, this is the like every third Friday of the month, we're going to get together and we're going to do something. We're going to go play pool. We're going to go, do this thing or whatever. But it requires planning and it requires time. And that makes it a little bit difficult.
So it's just, one of the things that I've noticed as well is that a lot of guys, their social group becomes their wife's social group. So it's her wife's friends and their husbands, as opposed to keeping their friends that they had before the marriage, for example. Do you see that as well? And if so, what advice would you have for that?
Yeah, and I see it both ways too. Sometimes the husband's friends, like their wives become the wife's friends, depending, especially if one of them moved to a new community, then it's a very natural thing. I do think that's helpful. Like it makes sometimes logistics easier to get together because you don't have to necessarily choose between spending time with your spouse, even though you're in separate domains when you're hanging out with like the men are hanging out together and the women are hanging out together, but still you're at the same social function. So sometimes that helps. But I think it is still important to have your own network, your own and it's not always feasible for people to have friends that have known them in different stages of life, because the type of reflections and kind of call outs, like the way that your friend who's known you for a long time is able to call you out, is completely different than the friend that just met you in adulthood. I was just talking to somebody about how even my name, and like you can tell when a friend met me based on how they say my name. Right. So people who knew me when I was really young, it was Sarah, and people who know me now, it's Sarah. Right. So you can tell how long the friendship has been. Right. And so it's just even something as small as that. Right. So it's so I think it is important. And also, you don't want to fully depend on your spouse for everything. Right. It's not fair to each other. It's not fair to your spouse. Like everybody has to come into the marriage as a whole person. And part of being a whole person means you have your own relationships. You have friendships that you're invested in. And when you get married at first, it's normal if some of those friendships take a little bit of a backseat because you're getting to know your spouse. You're trying to figure out that balance. But then little by little, it's important to bring them back into your life.
So both spouses should be okay with that person getting their time with their friends. Even if they're not invited, nobody should be offended.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the intention is a really big thing here, right? If you want good for your spouse, then you want to see them thrive in a lot of ways. You want to, and one of the ways is going to be in relationships, and that involves friendships. One of the ways is going to be in terms of their mental and emotional health. That involves friendships. So if you want good for your spouse, let it come from every avenue as much as possible.
The running joke, I used to have a friend of mine. I mean, it's a running joke amongst lots of guys, is that when their wife calls, they have to pretend like they're not having fun. So they might be dying of laughter, having the most fun, and then somebody's wife is there, and then you find his tone changes and he's all sad and stuff like that. I used to have one of our older guys. He was like married with kids when we were all just like single guys running around in a van, and we'd be all packed in the van. But when his wife called, he would sound like the saddest guy in the world. And I was like, why do you have to do this? So what is the reason why guys have to do this?
That's really interesting, right? Because there's a twofold thing, right? So in this situation, maybe there's a constant conversation happening at home of like, well, how can you have fun without me, right? When like if like I should be the most important person in the world to you, and so you should miss me when I'm not there and things like that. And so maybe that's part of the dynamic.
And to be fair, also full context, usually those phone calls were happening at 1 a.m. when he's out
Okay.
with the guys instead of being home by now. So
Okay, that helps.
Yeah.
The context does help, right? And so maybe that's a good conversation to have of like, hey, does your spouse get worried about you if you stay out past a certain time and everything? Um, but I also think, I don't know, when I think about it, I think if you are going to sacrifice family time with your spouse for their betterment and for something meaningful to them, wouldn't you want them to have a good time? Right? Because then what's the point of sacrificing that time if they're going to be miserable anyway? They might as well have just stayed at home, right? So I think that's kind of the flip side of thinking about it a little bit differently too.
and if they're going to be miserable, they might as well stay at home. She does not mean that if you stay at home, then you'll be miserable. So
Might as well just
obviously,
be miserable at home with your spouse. No, that's not what I meant.
so talking about this idea of I'm really interested in what like you're seeing the most when it comes to, so sure, there's seasonal depression. There's, generally with regards to mental health, you'd hear in the United States that it's mostly anxiety and depression. What are you seeing that you would like for people to pay attention to? What are you seeing on the ground?
I think that across the board, a foundational, like if we're looking at kind of one of the root issues that I'm seeing in our community, and definitely not just in our community, this is a symptom of the greater population, but there is a really like inherent difficulty in being uncomfortable, of going through hard things, of just sitting with uncomfortable emotions. And I think it's really a symptom of the fact that we're like this cell phone generation. As soon as something feels, so you walk into a restaurant, you're waiting for a friend, and somebody feels uncomfortable sitting at a table alone. How do they manage that discomfort? They pull out their phone, and suddenly they don't feel so alone, and suddenly they don't feel so uncomfortable. We have this constant access to dopamine, and dopamine is like the happy hormone, like the happy chemical in your brain, that when you constantly access it, it becomes very addictive. And once you feel any twinge of like something negative, it's, oh, we got to get rid of it. We have the, like, there's an inherent anxiety of like, no, I have to get rid of that feeling. And we do it often through our phones. And so as a society, as a community, I think that we have really struggled with like this idea of right, patience and perseverance and things. We really struggle with that because we know it's almost this feeling of we no longer need it because we always have access to something that's going to make us feel better in the moment. I think that's a really big problem, and I see it showing up in therapy a lot.
On the topic of attachment to phones, we always used to think that it's something that just teenagers are addicted to. They're more inclined to be attached to it. But I can tell you, giving khutbahs every week, the people who are on their phones during the khutbah are not the kids as much as they're the elders, like people in their 50s and 60s and 40s. These guys are on their phones, and I'm yelling at everybody telling them to put their phone away. So it's really something that is incredible in how prevalent it is. And even people who lived before cell phones come out, they're as attached as anybody else. So this idea of becoming or being comfortable being uncomfortable, I think that to some degree, even beyond generational, it is the Western experience because we're not used to at all having things outside of our control. So for example, by 20 years old, I'm supposed to be in university. By 23, 24, at latest, I should have graduated already. And then by 30, I should have gotten married, should have had, by 35, I should have a house, whatever the metrics are, according to but we're not used to interruptions, and we're not comfortable with interruptions. Whereas I think of, for example, in the Muslim world, you might have, for sure, I know in a number of countries, you might have a conflict that happens in the country that just dismisses people's 2 years of a person's life gets lost, right? In Sudan, even before the war, there would be strikes that happen at a university, and then one semester is gone, or an illness or anything like that might cause a person, and so they're much more comfortable with this idea that Allah is in control, and whatever timeline, they don't have as structured a timeline necessarily as we do. And I think that lack of control at any point in time causes people a lot of anxiety.
It's called uncertainty tolerance. There's a term for it. And your ability to tolerate uncertainty is a marker of healthy mental health and resilience. Resilience is this idea of being able to bounce back after something happens, like a difficult situation happens, being able to bounce back to your baseline. How quickly can you do that? Can you even come back better, right? That's resilience, bouncing back. And
And
uncertainty.
how are we when it comes to resilience generally?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like you were talking about, these strikes that would close down a university and people just being like, khair inshallah, right? Like, inshallah, like once you face these things, you realize how much you can face. In our society, you never have to face anything because you can, like now, what do people post complaints about? Somebody sat in my seat on the airplane and I had to tell them that it was my seat. I can't believe how rude they were. These are the things, these are the small things. You see like people completely melting down because the bakery got their birthday cake wrong, right? And so that's what it like how can people grow if there's another term. It's called bulldozer parenting, where parents think that the way to raise successful kids is to prevent them from having to deal with hardship. And so they bulldoze all the obstacles that their child might face. And what do you end up with? Spoiled kids. Kids who have no idea what to do when something doesn't go their way, because in their life, everything has gone their way. We live in a time of instant gratification. You want something, you click on Amazon and it's there within a few hours. So there's just no discomfort, and it really that really prevents us from being resilient, because then the smallest unpredictability, the smallest change causes people to say, why would Allah do this to me? Then question the plan of Allah.
You do have an article on Yaqeen's website on why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala test us. So you have the idea for sure that obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you and you're supposed to submit to the test. But what are the guidelines? What are the parameters with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing me versus this is something that I need to change, I need to get some sort of assistance for? There is the element for sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might be testing me with regards to feeling and emotion and anxiety. When do I know that I need to go and get help, for example?
So accepting that there is a test from Allah is one thing, right? You can accept that, and we all go through, this is a guarantee in our lives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us that we're going to be tested. So we know that we're going to be tested, but where we come into play is now what am I going to do with the test? Am I going to still look at it through the lens of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom? Am I going to find something that I can reflect on in terms of gratitude? Am I going to look at what strength is being honed, what quality is being honed through this test that I never would have gained otherwise, right? How am I going to reflect on this test? What steps am I going to take? The purpose of a test is it going to bring me closer to Allah or further away from Him? So what steps can I take to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And one of those steps can be professional help when it's needed. And you know that you would benefit from professional help when your daily functioning is impacted. Like that's kind of just like a blanket statement. So if you are having trouble maintaining your job, going to class, taking care of your family, doing all of these different things, if you're having trouble with that, right, and it is happening long term, that's your indication that professional help could be beneficial.
That's an indication of an addiction also, right? When it's impeding your daily functions, like you're
Yes.
choosing that over other things that would normally.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because then you know it's gotten out of hand and out of your control, right? Because everybody has their days where they're down, right? And there are days even where a person's just like, I can't even get out of bed. That's okay. It's one day. That's not something that necessarily is like, okay, I have to go see a psychiatrist, I have to go see a therapist. But when you have a lot of those days, that's when it really impacts your life. And you take the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, and when you and that can be getting professional help. And when you intend that professional help for the sake of Allah, because when we are functioning is impeded, when we're not functioning at full capacity, we're usually not functioning at full capacity spiritually too. And so if you intend getting that help for the sake of Allah, that this is going to allow me to be more consistent in my salah, this is going to allow me to get closer to Allah, then that can be an act of worship too, inshallah.
For sure, if a person is like their salah is impeded, right? We say like whatever is obligatory and can't be done except through X, Y, and Z, then X, Y, and Z becomes obligatory too. So مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ وَاجِبٌ. Whatever is obligatory and you can't do it except, and so that's when you would tell somebody that no, you actually have to go see a therapist because you're not able to pray without, you haven't prayed. We're talking about the people who, for example, if you're talking about people having meltdowns based on just their birthday cake not being to their liking. So at what point in time are we able to actually acknowledge that, yes, even though we're all supposed to be grateful, and most of the time people who are in the first world, so to speak, they do have it much better than everybody else, but is it kind of as well dismissive to say to people, you just need to be grateful, you need to be grateful, even though my problems might not be as great as somebody else's problems? Are they still problems? Like, is my test comparable also to the lifestyle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me? And is it okay for me to be upset at whatever this thing is without necessarily comparing it to the worst that somebody else somewhere in the world is going through?
Yeah. And I think that that's a really good point, because I think we do sometimes we can dismiss within ourselves and within others that, like, this, I shouldn't even be bothered by this because look at everything that my brothers and sisters are going through in other places of the world. But that doesn't really do much for us in that moment. It can be helpful because, like the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us, you look to those who have less because it makes you grateful. But at the same time, constantly dismissing a struggle is not going to help you face that struggle. And so it's, I view it as like this and that, not but, right? Because a lot of times it's like, yeah, I'm going through this, but people are going through so much worse. No, it's, yeah, I'm going through this and it's hard. And I am also really grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all the blessings that He's given me. They can coexist, right? Like, there's not this idea of I cannot be grateful if I'm struggling. Absolutely not. Some of the greatest gratitude comes during times of struggle, right? Because when you, for example, I remember when I had to get a root canal, that, like, the level of discomfort and pain that you feel in your tooth, it makes you so grateful for the days that you didn't have it. Yeah. Right. And so I can say I'm in a lot of pain. This is really uncomfortable. And I'm so grateful for the rest of the body parts that are working well. Alhamdulillah. Right. So they can coexist. So that's what I would say is gratitude is not meant to dismiss. Gratitude is help to, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if you're grateful, I will increase you, right? So it helps you to get through the hardship, but not just dismiss the hardship.
So a person can be grateful at the same time as being completely distressed and saddened, and
they can, I would say, gratitude helps prevent it from being completely. Because at the same time, we hold on to hope, right? We hold on to hope. It's you can be really, really sad. Like, people go through devastating things. They lose a loved one. Their livelihood changes completely. Their child is struggling with something, then they feel like they have no idea how to help them, right? So they feel helpless, right? All of these things, they can be really, really struggling and distressed and still be grateful for certain things. And that gratitude helps to mitigate some of the distress, but it doesn't necessarily take it all away, and that's okay.
You mentioned, what was it? Behavioral. It was when you were
Behavioral
talking activation. Do you have any gratitude activations, things that people can do just to start feeling grateful?
Yeah, so there's actually there's a research study that talks about how 3 gratitudes a day is one of the most research proven methods to help address anxiety and depression. So there's like research studies on medications, therapy, and things like that. Gratitude has its research studies
What
too.
does 3 gratitudes a day mean?
So that's where you would pick a certain time of day, and a lot of people will do it in the evening, and you reflect on 3 specific things you were grateful for. So you're not going to just say, I'm grateful for my eyesight. Right? You're going to say, I'm grateful that I had a chance to watch that bird hop along the fence outside of my window while I was drinking my cup of coffee today. Specific. Because what does that do when you are specific? Or I'm grateful that, for that joke that my child told me today. And what does that do is it teaches your brain, it retrains your brain to scan your environment for the good, for the blessings, for the things that you could be grateful for. And that rewires your brain so that it becomes easier and easier to start to pick up on things that you're grateful for in your daily life.
How important is it to always be rewiring your brain, reframing. I feel like in psychology it's mentioned a lot.
Yeah, I would say it's one of the biggest blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and it's also a big test because the fact that our brain, it's called your brain is plastic. That's the term, that it is changeable. I think it's such a big blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given that to us because we have the will, the free will to change certain things. But it's also a test because the more you do anything, the more it becomes a part of you. So the more time you spend on social media looking through people's lives who are just showing their highlight reels and not accurate, and the impact that that has on you, that becomes a part of the way you're wiring your brain. So whatever we ingest, we have to be very cautious because that changes the state of our brain. So we do have to be conscious about it constantly.
So social media was something that worried us all for many years, especially with regards to young people. Now we've entered into the age of AI. And so how are you guys dealing with that on the ground as well? Now, even just today, I was hearing a news story of a child who, I mean, he was 16 years old, but he was engaging with ChatGPT for an extended period of time, and he ended up committing suicide. And the ChatGPT was kind of like not egging him on, but it was helping him be his confident as he's talking to about suicide. And it didn't create any sort of it didn't prevent him from doing it. It didn't log off. It didn't stop. It didn't warn his parents or anything like that. There was no mechanism for it. There was no guidelines for it. So what are you, I guess, worried about as a professional in this field with regards to what you've seen? And number two, what, if you have anything yet, then I know this is something that still the entire world is trying to figure out and grapple, but are there any sort of tips that you would give parents and others?
Yeah, it's a whole new issue that I, as a parent and as a therapist, feel vastly underprepared for because I don't think anybody could have, well, some people may have foreseen the way this was going, but I'm not one of them. So, the thing I think to keep in mind when it comes to AI, ChatGPT, things like that is it will give you whatever you want. And that is very, very damaging. Because what this teenager wanted was support. And that's what ChatGPT gave him. It gave him support for whatever he wanted to do, which included something that was a horrible and very, very sad decision, suicide. But that's what it did. And that's its role, is it gives you what you want. And so that's why it's getting in between people in relationships, because a person's spouse is never going to have the perfect, validating, patient response that ChatGPT has. Not even a therapist is going to have that, right? And so the fact that this is a mechanism that never gets tired, that never invalidates, that never makes quote unquote mistakes, right? Makes plenty of mistakes, but just not necessarily in the way that we would think about them in conversation. It creates an even more unrealistic standard for what relationships should look like, and a person can't really live up to that, right? And so so that's one side of things. But
I was thinking like this seeking validation. People used to, and I'm saying used to, even though it seems so current, people used to seek it from their friends groups, and then when they wouldn't find it in their friends groups, they'd go on social media and get it from strangers. But even then, you might not get that validation. The video may not go viral. The people who comment might think you're a dork and actually hate it. But now when I go to ChatGPT, I get validation, or not just whatever the AI, platform is. You will get that validation 100% of the time, and I think that's novel.
And that goes back to what you were saying about the unpredictability thing.
Yeah.
The uncertainty tolerance. People, why is it so hard to have difficult conversations with somebody that you care about? Because you don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know what they're going to think. You don't know what they're going to say. Is it going to get worse? Now you have an AI mechanism that you don't have any worries. You don't have to worry about unpredictability. You don't have to worry about feelings getting hurt. You don't have to worry about anything. So now that discomfort again is eliminated. We're just getting further and further into that life of like, we don't need any discomfort whatsoever, including in our connections, where it's easier to connect with a virtual reality instead of of the real people around us. And I think that we're going to see incredibly, incredibly damaging things being done socially for kids. Like in Texas, they just recently mandated that no schools allow cell phones or smart devices and things like that in school. And I was like, this is a great move if they can stick with it, because it's going to force kids to build social connections. As a parent, what I would say is just monitor your child's usage of ChatGPT, any type of AI, any type of app in general. Obviously, we as parents need to monitor that. But a lot of times parents don't think about monitoring ChatGPT because it's just AI. Yeah, it's just tech, and it's not like there can't be a predator. This is an AI thing. We know we worry about predators on video games, on apps, on things like that. But AI is going to be really problematic if we don't monitor it, and also teach your kids proactively how to use it. They're going to use it. Teach them proactively. So like teach it like, okay, this is the prompt that you could, don't ask ChatGPT to write your essay. Here's the prompt that you can ask it to help coach you through how to write a good informative essay or something like that. So teach kids how to use it properly.
What if they say, well, I don't know how to use it, so you're telling me that I have to learn it just so that I can teach it to my kids?
Yes, I am 100%. I'm 100% saying that. And trust me, technology is not my forte, but
There are certain things that you can't plead ignorance on.
you have to and when what, like I worry about what is my responsibility going to be in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He gave me this amana, this trust of this child, and I know that there is a danger that is coming at them, and I refuse to equip myself so I can equip them. It's our responsibility, and it's hard, but sit with the discomfort, like push through that, because that's what's in the best interest of yourself, your family, and your children.
There's a quote that I heard from a psychologist. I'm not going to mention their name because I want to hear what you think about the quote. And then if you like it, I'll share their name. But if you don't, then it will be redacted. But he was answering this question about a person feeling like Allah's testing me with something beyond what I can bear. And so they said, like, I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't test me with anything more than I can bear, but I feel like this is actually more than I can bear. And so his response was, Allah is not a lie, and how you're feeling is also not a lie. But can I propose that you're not meant to bear it alone? So just because this is sent your way doesn't mean that it was sent your way for you to carry by yourself, and that you should extend beyond. Because a parent might say, well, you know what, I have a difficult child with, they're online and I don't know and what have you, but maybe I need to expand beyond my capacity and get some other people involved. Invite them into my homes as well and help them raise my kids.
I actually really love that quote. I love it.
That was Dr. Raymond Murray, Jersey's finest.
MashaAllah. Very, very good quote, because I think people often struggle with that. And I think that the reason why we struggle with this idea of, Allah doesn't burden a soul beyond what it can bear, but I know as a person, I can't bear this. No, the standard to which you're holding yourself to bear this might not be the standard to which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding you to bear it, right? And so that includes, like, do I have to bear it alone? That standard of, if I don't do this for my child, then I'm failing. No, why reach out, get the resources, like you said, of having somebody who is technologically savvy to come and teach you how to do this, to create firewalls in your home, to help you figure out how can I keep track of this, to help you understand the system. I think that's, when people want to learn how to invest, for example, their money, they take classes, they read books and things like that. So why not then do the same for something like this?
Do you think people need to take classes on parenting?
Yeah, I do.
Really?
I do. I think that...
What happened to just, this is the way my parents raised me. I know how they raised me. I'm going to lead with love, let's say. I'm not going to lead with the stick, but I'm going to lead with love, and I'll see how that figures out.
I think that when we had a village, it was less essential.
Okay.
But I think reading and classes have become some of our village. And so I think that...
And then reading and classes by who?
Yeah, you have to
right?
be careful, right? Because you also don't want to get it from the wrong source.
Sure.
Absolutely. That's really important. Um, but I think that there's a misconception that parenting comes naturally,
Mm,
and it often doesn't.
really?
Yeah, like for some people, there are some people who it is more natural for them than for others. But for a lot of people, it's just like, I don't even know what to say to my kid in this situation. Okay, follow an Instagram account where they tell you what to say, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be like you read a full-fledged book. Those sometimes are so boring, or like taking a full-fledged class. Sometimes it goes in one ear out the other. But follow content that is beneficial from beneficial sources, that can help. So because sometimes we have to curate our own villages now, and part of that is that we used to get knowledge of how to deal with our kids from our village, where even like the way grandparents used to be involved, where it was like, hey, that's like, you were too harsh with your child in this situation, or you're letting them get away with this and they're going to end up spoiled, right? Like the hard truths as a parent that we no longer hear. Right. So it's important to have some sort of outside voices to help you through this.
Do you have any recommendations?
Like places like things that you can follow. Yes. So one of my favorites, what's her handle? At Hannah Peaceful Home, I think is one. I really like her approach. It's gentle, but it doesn't avoid things. But it's kind. It comes from a place of love, mashallah. But it also is not going to coddle children. So I like the balance that she brings. That's the one that pops into my head when I'm thinking about it.
Beautiful. You mentioned this idea of villages, and you can curate a village or create a village. What are some of the ways that you've actually seen people actually create a village? Because I feel like all of these things that we've talked about, people being afraid of letting people into their homes because it's a mess, and it's been interesting to me to see just how many obstacles we've placed in creating that village. Because people who have villages, usually they have their family around and they literally there's just the traditional village. But people who don't have their family around for whatever reason, what are some of the ways that they can actually create that village?
Yeah, a lot of people, when they talk about curating a village these days, it's through paid means,
Mm.
right? Having somebody,
Which
a
immediately
baby.
we don't like, obviously.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
having a babysitter come to give you some free time to take care of your kids, having, like a food
That's
service.
hiring a village. That's not creating a village.
But yes,
Yes.
and when needed, and if you have the means, okay, it can be helpful, alhamdulillah. But I also think it's sad that that's what we sometimes feel like we need to do. Because why do we feel the need to do that? Is because we don't have an actual village where we can rely on one another, or we feel like we should never ask for help. We should never ask, and so that makes it difficult. So I think that finding a community where you see the way that people are raising their kids and you like it, right? Like you like the way that they're doing things. You like them as a person. You have similar values, and you have social gatherings. You might do a joint halaqah for the kids or things like that. But also, it's like, okay, sometimes we're gonna pick up each other's kids from school. When I'm running late, you're gonna have my kid for a snack after school, and I'll come pick them up later. Little things where you are allowed to now ask one another for help in those situations, and it starts step by step. So it's like it's these little steps, and realize that often people feel really privileged when they're the one that you ask for help.
Well, that's another thing for sure. Absolutely. That when you're asking for help, you're actually honoring that person by trusting them with your family or your kids. But in a world of helicopter parents and bulldozer parents and all of these types of things, how do we even get to the point where I am trusting somebody else with my kids?
One of the like I said, the first step is you really do have to get to know people, right? So it goes all the way back to what we were talking about before, your friendships, right? Like getting to know somebody on a level where you can trust them with that is something that's a personal relationship between you and them too. But then also becoming the parent that you would be able to entrust your kids with, right? So what I mean by that is, if somebody's kids are going to be at your house, what would you want that parent to do? with your kids if they were at your house. So it might be like, recently I had my son had some friends over for like a video game party. And I told the moms, I said, look, when your boys come in, any boy that has a phone, I'm going to take their phone and I'm going to put it in a box. And if they need to talk to you, I'll give them their phone or they can call from my phone, but we're not going to have any phones at the party because that's what I would want them to do. That would make me feel comfortable with my son being at their house.
Sure.
Right. So it's like, okay, let me do
So you
the
set
things.
the standard basically for everybody, set the tone.
Or I kind of set what I prefer, and it's okay if that's not what they would do, right? Then
You just wouldn't send your kid.
I would make a different decision. I might make a different decision, or I would talk to them about it or something like that. It's not black and white, I don't think, but at least they kind of know where I'm coming from, right? And then it also helped them to feel comfortable too, right? So I think communication is a big part of it. Sometimes we worry we're going to be overbearing or we're going to do, it's okay to communicate.
No, that's great actually. And that is a worry that I see a lot actually with regards to people feeling that they're going to be overbearing. I was talking to one friend of mine who grew up with a number of us, lives in a different city, has a number of friends who we all know, kids the same age, and he's talking about how he doesn't have time to spend time, just with his wife because they're always raising the kids. I said, well, why don't you lean on these guys? And he was like, well, I never thought of that. I was like, what do you mean you didn't think about that? But you might actually have so many friends that you can actually reach out to, but we are, and his fear was, he said, what if, I got a rowdy kid, he might break something. It's like, so what if they broke something in your house? Like, how would you feel? It's like, I wouldn't mind. So why do you think they would mind? And so that type of fear of being overbearing at times impedes us from really just a lot of connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're going to, as you get to, and that's again, getting to know people on a little bit of a deeper level, you're going to know which friend can handle a rowdy kid. And you're going to know which friend's house accommodates that. And then you're going to know the ones that don't. And that's okay because they can do other things, right? So everybody has a role to play. That's the point of a village.
How important is it that, that we continue to foster human connection? Because what if somebody says, you know what? I enjoy AI better than I enjoy human beings. Like the conversations that we have are more intelligent, it's deeper. It's not just about validation. It is about that it is a better experience for me. And so if we're going to start hearing that more and more, why is it important that I actually go out of my way to continue to create relations with these fallible human beings?
I think that there's balance, right? There can be a place for this and a place for that, right? That maybe an AI model will satisfy some intellectual curiosity that your friend group doesn't. Sure. Okay. And that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. But it doesn't mean that there's no place for human friends, right? Like what is something, like being able to look at it from the lens of what do I gain when I am in these people's company, and even if it's something like, hey, sometimes we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together. We talk about something Islamic. Okay, well then I know the angels.
ChatGPT says Jazakallah khair and may Allah accept your, does all of that.
Actually, ChatGPT makes some really nice dots for you.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah. Exactly.
But does that count with like the angels lowering the way? I don't think so, right? So even just like there's so many ahadith and so many like things within our Islamic tradition of the benefit and the blessings that come from human interactions. Even if that's all you're getting.
Great.
Then that's something.
Great point.
Right? So but realistically, and from a mental health and psychological perspective, having human connection and as much as possible in-person human connection, that cannot be replaced by an AI model.
Jazakallah khair. Final thoughts. What would you like for people to be doing after listening to this session?
So something I would love for people to do is to reach out to somebody in your social network, reach out to a friend, reach out to somebody that you care about, because it's not, everything that we've been talking about here has been about loneliness, and we've been talking about it as like, this is something for you, us trying to convince you that you still need human beings in your life. But you know what? Like, life is not just about you as a person. It's not just about us. It's about everybody. And so even if you feel like, I don't know how much I gain from this person, well, what if they're gaining from you? Right? So it's not just about like solidifying social connection because that's what's helpful for you and your mental health and your Islamic well-being, but what about for that person too? So reach out to somebody.
You know, you just reminded me. So this is going to be a false final note, because you brought up something about you doing something for someone else. You know, I had presentation I did last week about the concept of ithar, just selflessness and sacrificing for other people. And I already anticipated that the number one question was going to be, what if people take advantage of my generosity? What if people take advantage of my selflessness? I can be selfless, but people are just going to keep taking and keep taking and keep taking. So how do I create a boundary, even as I'm going out, like you're saying, to reach out to other people? If I am a giver and people are just going to take, how do I create a boundary for myself?
You know, it's so interesting because that perspective, just the question itself, right? Of like, how do I like basically not get burnt out from people taking from me? It's such a Western framework.
Sure.
Just the question itself. And obviously we are growing up, we're living and growing up in a Western framework. So a lot of our thoughts and our mentalities come from that lens. But I think we have to be a little curious and challenge some of those lenses, right? Where, you know, the idea of being able to look at somebody reaching out to you for help as an opportunity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending to please him, a door of opportunity where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says the most beloved to Allah is the one who's most beneficial to people, right? So this is a door that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is opening up for good for you to convey. That being said, it's also important to realize that yes, there are takers in this world, right? There are takers who will never give, but will always expect you to give. And then if we're looking at it in comparison to what we offered and it's not equivalent, does that build resentment? Well, if you did it for the sake of Allah and you keep it in your mind that I did what I was capable of, and I give them the benefit of the doubt, husn dhan, that they're going to do what's within their capacity, that helps to maintain that relationship. But also knowing your own limits, right? Like the quote that I always say, every yes is also a no. If I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Am I giving the other people the obligations that I have in my life? Am I giving all of that its rights? Can I still give my children, my family, myself, all these different things, their rights, and do this at the same time? Then go for it. Let yourself be a little bit uncomfortable. And if you can't, that's okay. Next time, inshallah, you can. And so realistically, I think words are very, very powerful, right? And so when we say self-sacrifice, I think if we say that about what somebody else has done that we've benefited from, I think that's good, because we're acknowledging everything that they've done that we have gained. Okay, right? My parents came from, from a different country, everything that they've sacrificed for me so I could live the life that I live, it makes me appreciate them more. But when I use the word self-sacrifice for myself, it doesn't feel good. And I would recommend we don't do that for ourselves, because it's not self-sacrifice when it's for you, right? Like when I do something, and if I have the intention to do something for the sake of Allah, that's not self-sacrifice, because in the end it is for me. It's for my akhirah. Even if it's a little hard here, I'll be rewarded for it there. So let me not use that terminology, right? Because it helps us to reframe it, because we realize that what we're gaining in the end is greater than what we've given up here.
Sure. I didn't even say self-sacrifice, did I?
I think you used
No,
the
I
word.
said selfless.
No, I think you used sacrifice in
Did
there
I?
somewhere. Maybe, I
Okay.
don't know.
Maybe I used sacrifice, but not self-sacrifice.
Okay.
I'm like, is she refuting me on my podcast?
Well, even sacrifice. No, but you
Okay.
didn't use it in terms of like
Yeah.
terms of that. But I'm just saying that
Yeah,
term.
no, I care about words a lot. So the reason, because the word for ithad is translated as altruism, and I don't like altruism. Like, when do people use altruism in a sentence? So I'm definitely a fan of ithad being used just as it is in Arabic, because some of the words you just have to bully into the English language, and it doesn't have any like hard letters. But I agree with self-sacrifice 100%, because it makes you seem like you're sacrificing yourself. Jazakallah khair. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Ustada Sarah. Looking forward, Sarah. Sorry, I'm going to pronounce it correctly, Ustada Sarah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you always for your wisdom and your experience and your expertise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you tawfiq, inshallah ta'ala. I'm looking forward to having you again in the Maghrib studios very soon.
Ameen, ameen, and the same for
And
you.
tell us
I'm
what you
looking
thought of the
forward
studio.
to.
Today's your first day recording
Yeah,
here.
I was really pleasantly surprised when I walked in. Mashallah, the space is great, a lot more comfortable than previous places that we were
Alhamdulillah.
recording in. Alhamdulillah, no loud singing groups in the background, so it's been a great experience.
That was
Alhamdulillah.
because of a church that was renting the space next to us. That's
Yes.
the reason why. It
Yes.
wasn't because Bilal was in the back singing.
No.
Jazakallah khair, guys.
وإياكم.
Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.